Let us breathe into the holy and sacred moment. And as we do so, we call to mind the names of those for whom we pray. In faith and trust, we know that God understands each need, for there is no request too large or too small to be heard. We slow our thoughts, listening for our hearts, becoming aligned with the Spirit as it pulses through our veins and our breath. As wonderful and as brilliant as our minds can be, we can never think our way to God. For the divine presence is always a revelation to the heart through the living of our daily life. God is not outside of us or a force that acts upon us. God is the very essence of the life that lives through us, day in and day out. It is our thinking that gives shape and form to the story we call our life. To sit in silent communion with God allows the mind to relax its hold, even as it opens the invitation for greater revelation, planting new seeds of all possibilities in our hearts. So let us be still and become more aware of the indwelling presence living in us as us. Here and now, we are creating new worlds that even a moment ago were not possible. For as we nurture the tiny new seeds of revelation, our lives will blossom and grow. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Amen. I got into Unity back in the 1980s, and I was in my early 30s, mid 30s at that time, and I was a devotee of all my children. And I would tape it. Remember back in those days when you taped it? And then on Friday night, I would come home and I would watch all 5 episodes. So by the time the night was over, then, of course, as every soap opera, even if you've never watched it, you can probably assume that there was always a cliffhanger. So all weekend long, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, I'd think, okay, now, if she just knew about him and he knew about her, and I always wanted a happily ever after. I should have worked for Hallmark back in the day because I like a happily ever after, kind of movie. But I'd come home on Monday and I'd get a sneak preview of what happened on Monday. The cliffhanger was never resolved. There was a new one. There was always more chaos. There was always something coming out. Somebody came back from the dead. Something happened. It was always something that kept the agitation going. So you would watch again and again. It never occurred to me in those early years that the power of my mind was so strong. And then I got into Unity. And I began to understand that my mind, this thing we call mind, is not just the gray matter between my ears. That is the brain. But that my mind was an incredible consciousness in every cell and fiber of my being. It was vitally alive, had the life force within it, and it was the meaning maker of the movie called Me. Not the movie called All My Children, although I found out how we could do that very easily because I could be so absorbed in it. But I began to understand how that very same power of creating a happily ever after for a fictional character was the same power that lived within me to shape and mold my own living story. Also, when I first got into Unity, I began to journal and journal in earnest. We used to have a thing called the Mastermind Journal, and there's some of you that were familiar with Mastermind journals. And every year it was a 365 journal. It was laid out with affirmations from Jack Boland in Unity in Michigan. And the very first page always talked about how you should take a moment to pray and recognize that the next 365 days were like new fallen snow. I always love that imagery. New fallen snow. There were no footprints in this snow. There were just pages and pages and pages of a life that I now was about to create. And suddenly I became more aware that my mind was so much bigger than my brain. You see, I'd always understood, and I think a lot of people do, that our mind/brain are equal, meaning that my brain was my education, my upbringing, my experiences were all in my mind. Well, actually, they were in my brain as images and impressions, but it was to my mind that gave the meaning to the story called me. And so that was a huge insight for me when I first got into Unity. So principle number 3, which we are working our way toward the 5 principles of Unity, they're all sort of interlocking. It's hard to kind of separate and say, well, forget what I said last week. No, it's all kind of embedded in what we're talking about this week, because we're saying that human beings create their experiences by the activity of their thinking, not just the brain, but the mind. Everything in the manifest world begins as a thought. Everything in the manifest world begins as a thought. And I was watching an old clip on 60 Minutes a couple of days ago, and the gentleman that was speaking was saying, where does war begin? And I never really got much thought about that, but he said it didn't begin when the army started moving across the boundary. It began with a thought in someone's mind, and that someone becomes someone's, plural. For example, in 1918, when the armistice was signed at the end of World War I, the Germans had the thought that they had been mistreated. And in many respects, it was true as part of the tenets of that 1918 agreement. It planted a seed in 1918 that ultimately led to September 1st, 1939. All those years. It's a process, it's a procedure, it's propaganda, it's movement. And so we tend to think that it was just the army just crossed, but no, it was a seed thought that began to fester and began to grow in the minds of many. The next thing I learned in Unity, when I was learning about this idea of the mind, was an affirmation from Charles Fillmore. He said, thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Thoughts held in mind produced after their kind. And when I first got into Unity, being very zealous of Unity as I was very concerned that when I was shouting obscenities at the driver who cut me off on the road, and I held that thought until the next exit when they got off, that maybe I was messing up my mind. But that's not really what Charles was talking about. Because you see, as we talked about last week, we have been imbued with the seed thoughts of life, love, intelligence, and power, the creative act of the divine within us. And what happens is we begin to hold in mind these seed thoughts. And of course, we don't hold all of them all at the same time with the same level of degree. And they begin to flourish and nurture. And so we want to ask ourselves, well, okay, how do I know what seed thoughts I'm nurturing and what ones I need to nurture? In a very real sense, there's another corollary to that law. What you give, you receive. What goes out, comes back. Goes around, comes around. The eternal flow. And when you want to know what seed you are nourishing, look at what's coming in to your life, because that's the seeds that you are nourishing. If wonderful people are coming into your life, good experiences are coming into your life, or conversely, more angry people, difficult situations are coming into your life, then you must step back and say to yourself, how am I nurturing the seeds of life, love, intelligence, and power so that they're coming back to me in a negative way or in a positive way? But there's something else we need to realize in this particular situation. And I think this is probably the hardest thing for us to grasp. We do not always reap in the fields that we sow. Listen to that again. We do not always reap in the fields that we sow. How often, hopefully you've never said it, but we've heard people say it, I gave the best years of my life to that man and he went out with some other woman. I gave everything up for my kids and now my kids don't even talk to me. You see, you have an expectation that you have given into a field called children, husband, marriage, relationships, job, career, name it, name it, name it. And you expect that the reward comes back to you from this field in which you have sown. Now think about that for a minute. I see this so often, and it's so difficult that people will say, well, my kids didn't do this and they didn't do that and this, that, and the other thing. When over here, there's a neighbor who just loves to come over and have tea with you and listen to all your problems and give you their time and energy. You are reaping in a field that you didn't sow. I have this wonderful lady. She's 98 years old, sharp as a tack. I talk to her about every 2-3 weeks. Aunt Pat, she is not my aunt. We have no biological relationship to each other. She's a friend of a friend of a friend. But I love to talk to Aunt Pat. She is a field that I never sowed any seeds in whatsoever. She never lived near me. I once in a while met her when she came to visit my friends. How interesting that she would continue to be part of my life, and I would be blessed by the seeds I had planted in other fields that are now giving fruition in the field, what I call Aunt Pat. You see, we also don't live in a vacuum. It's very difficult when we talk about these things because they're so nuanced. At least that's my perception, or the word I'd like to use, because things do happen to us. We live in a world where other people, if this was just a world of Marianne, oh my God, it'd be such a great place. Okay, because Marianne has brilliant ideas and it would just be easy to live here for Marianne. But Marianne doesn't live in a world with just Marianne. She lives in a world, as we all do, where there are other people, other opinions, other lifestyles, other choices, other religions. And so I find, as I'm sure we all do, that what really we're talking about here, as we touched on last week, it's how we respond. Our greatest God-given ability is how we respond to the world, to the things that are happening around us. You see, there is a creative solution to everything. Now, why do I say that? Remember last week, the Creator created creation. And if we are going to most emulate the Creator, we do what? We create. Therefore, all the tools for creating creative solutions in our personal life, in the world's life, are there available to us in our mind, not just our brain, although it's a contributing factor. It's in the whole consciousness of our body. But so often we go, well, now, wait a minute. I'm not quite getting this thing about we have all these creative solutions. And I've thought to myself, what is it in my own life? If I'm challenged by something, whether it be health, money, friends, internet, whatever it might be, I have the creative solutions within me, but I don't always see them. I don't always experience them. I don't always feel them. What's also stopping this creative flow? If I'm giving out, I should be receiving, and in receiving, I come with ideas and creative opportunities. I think what prevents a lot of us truly living what I'm going to call in the flow of life is our expectations around life. It is how we view life. You see, how are we connecting with those seeds that we are planting? And how do we expect them to grow? So there's a couple of expectations, I think, that I've been looking at in my own life. The first one I'm going to call living in the future. And this one was painfully brought to my awareness. Back in 2017, I lead international tours, and we were going to Eastern Europe. And I was so excited because my degree in college was the Hungarian Empire of the Habsburgs, which is Austria, parts of Germany, Hungary, the Czech Republic, all of that. And that's where we were going. I purposefully planned this trip to go to all these places. I was so excited. But for some reason that year, work was not really happy. Right now, I can't even tell you why I wasn't happy, but I was really unhappy in ministry. So I kept focusing on this trip, and I kept saying, 421 days from now, we're going to be, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be here, this and this and this. And I kept living into that future experience. So the day comes and off we go. We arrive in Munich. We go to Salzburg, had to check in with the Sound of Music people, which of course is where the Von Trapp family lived. And as we were driving from Salzburg to Vienna, I was thinking to myself, okay, tonight we'll be in Vienna. Then tomorrow we're going to Budapest. And then 3 days from there, I was forward moving. And I realized suddenly the trip was going too fast. It was happening to this trip that I had wanted since I was in college, that I had always wanted to see these places, was like on fast forward. And the scary thing was, in the moment, I wasn't really able to slow it down. I had so trained my mind to be fast forward to what's gonna happen that I couldn't stay present to what was happening. Suddenly we were back in Munich, we were on the way home, and it was over. And I was really upset with myself. My expectation did not allow for a creative solution because I was not present in the moment to make it happen. The second expectation is that we believe that it's all about the other. And this is one that, oh my goodness, we all struggle with. We constantly struggle with the fact that someone or something out there is doing it to us. And when we don't take time to be what I'm going to call self-referred, self-reflected, then we lose the very information. Again, we're talking about how to have more creative solutions in our life, how to make the seeds that we are nurturing give us a more abundant harvest. But you see, we're cutting down the harvest before it even really blossoms when we think the other guy, girl, whoever done it to us. And that's a really difficult thing. And I think our world right now is so, they did it. They did it. But what you have to realize is, why does it bug you? Did you ever think of that? Who cares? Why does it bug you? I can read an article in the paper and I will say to Patrick, that really makes me mad. That really makes me mad. And he'll say, really? Why? Well, it just does. And that's an interesting question. Why does it make me mad and not him? What is it about me, not about what's going on outside of myself? What is it about me that hits my buttons? You've heard that term before, I'm sure. Why are my buttons getting hit? Because in those moments, I have expectations that things will be different. Well, they're not. This is how it is. So I have to step back and, oh my goodness, this is, folks, if you think this spiritual journey is take 2 prayers and call me in the morning and you're there, no. This is work, and it's work that will consume your life, through your life and beyond. To really dig into the mystery of your mind that houses all of this information, that houses all this hurt and anger and pain and joy and beauty and goodness. That's the work that really has to be done. And sometimes I have to say to myself, Marion, why are you mad? Why are you? And I poke myself, why are you mad? It's just a newscast. It's just something that didn't happen right. It just, whatever. Why are you mad? Because oftentimes what it tells us is something happened to us when we were 3 years old and we didn't get a chance to do anything about it then. And it's brought up the mad all over again. But if we're truly to be spiritual, we've got to let that go, because the third expectation, and you're not going to like this one any more than you like the other ones, change, dealing with change. The history of the world is the history of change. I heard that the other day and I thought, oh, yeah, the history of the world is the history of change. Do you realize that if someone today was 20 years old and they were deciding to go to college for a specific skill, by the time they are 30, that's just 10 years, that skill will no longer exist. The skill, the whole universe. And we've seen it. I mean, COVID put us on a whole different track. A world, it's hard to think of the world of 2019. Because it's gone by. It's all new. And if we think that in another 10 years, when I'm 30, now I have to reinvent myself, as the term goes, to get a job when I'm 40, because those skills are no longer needed. That company is no longer needed. The horse and buggy. How many companies are still making horse and buggies? Not a lot. You see? And so what happens over the course of time, people get angry, they're upset. And we see this today, I mean, really strongly. People don't understand that change is happening all around them. And the resistance to that change is the resistance to letting go of their investment. Now think about this. When you're 20, maybe you've taken a couple college classes, you've gone to this job and no biggie. But by the time you're 60, you've worked in this career, in this company for maybe 40 years. You've worked your way up the ladder. Now they're saying, listen, Sam, there's no such thing as this job anymore. The company's folding. There's no job that looks like the job you used to have. Go even a little bit farther. How many of you, and this is going to get ugly, have an outfit in your closet that was a lot of money? It's dated and it doesn't fit. But why don't you let it go? Because you invested. Why don't you let go of the lemon car? You've invested not only money, but your energy. You bought this car. You were proud of it. You told everybody, hey, I got this really great car. It's a lemon. Let it go. But you know, I don't. And I know others don't either. It gets more and more difficult as we get older, not because the change itself is harder, but because the investment in the old is more difficult to let go of. All of these things are part of what makes the meaning of our life. And if we are ever to really understand that power of meaning making in our life, we have to understand that first and foremost, we do have the seeds of life, love, intelligence, and power, that our ability to think, both with our brain and with the sensory input of our whole consciousness and our whole mind, can go on two trajectories. That it can be down the path of stinkin' thinking, or it can be down the path of beauty and light and love. And I'm not talking airy-fairy here. I'm just talking the groundedness from which we give meaning to our life. Do we believe we have a good life? Do we believe we have a life worth living? Or do we just say, well, I just can't wait till I die? You know, we oftentimes look at the Bible and things like you said, oh, that's so old. I don't know what kind of information I'm going to get from that. And yet last week we looked at the parable of the sower and the seed out of Matthew. And this week we'll look at the letter, Paul's letter to the Philippians, one of my favorite letters. You know, in chapter 4, around verse 8, he starts saying, you know, we need to think on the beautiful. We need to think on the good. We need to think on the kind, because what we're doing is we're letting those seeds begin to break open, and we're letting those seeds begin to nurture and grow and plant roots into the very soul of our being, which is their mind and our consciousness. Because in the end, he said, we need to learn to be content with what we have. When we have all these expectations, when we have all these ideas, and we live out here in a fantasy world that isn't really a real world, when we want to be so quick to say it's all about them and never self-referral, then the meaning we give our life doesn't have much meaning. So Paul tells us and reiterates, think on the beautiful, think on the good, whatever's kind and whatever's just. Think on the concept, think on the people that you know are part of your life and are giving a rich reward to you. To be content with what we have doesn't mean to be stagnant. It means to be blessed in the moment, as we sit here, as we speak, in enjoying the fruits of the blessings of the flow of life, because we used our mind to create the world in which we live. Thank you, and God bless.